All right, I'm turning on the recording. As usual, we post the recordings of these meetings on the Climate Commission's YouTube channel. So good day, everybody. Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at MDE. We have several MWG members here with us today. Great seeing everyone. And we have some other callers. Good seeing you too. Is there anyone standing in for an MWG member today? Yeah, Michelle. Hey.
Hi, folks. Hi, good to see you guys. And I also, maybe we should chat offline at some point, Mark, too, to figure out if TNC is still on the MWG, but at least for the time being, standing in for Mari Rosales.
Great. Thank you very much. And I see a note from Morgan for MDOT. Thank you. And see hands up from Nina. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, standing in for David Lapp from OPC.
Great. Thanks. Welcome, Nina and Lauren.
Hello, standing in for Sonia Harbaugh from BGE.
Great. Welcome, Lauren. Okay, well, turning it over to our co-chairs, Kim Coble and Mike Powell, for opening comments.
You want to start, Kim?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think one of the things that in the interim between the last mitigation working group and this one, there were meetings of the steering committee in particular for the commission. And one of the things I took away from that is that the commission would like us to look at, you know, what we need to do to deal with the shortfall in projected emission reductions from what the original plan was. And in particular, it seemed to me there's a focus requested from the commission on the transportation, simply because I think transportation is the biggest shortfall. I don't think it's exclusively transportation they want us to look at, but I do think there is a desire that we look in particular about suggestions on the transportation emissions. There are other groups working on this through MDOT and others as well, but I think one of our charges is to look at that particular issue. So that is one of the subjects I think on today's agenda. Kim, did I leave anything out?
No, thanks, Mike. Glad everybody's here.
Great, and great preview of today's agenda. Yeah, we plan to have a conversation, maybe a bit of a brainstorming session about ways to address transportation sector emissions. Before we get into that, the last MWG meeting, for those who were able to attend, know that we poured data on you. It was a very intense meeting with lots of presentations, lots of data presentations. So we wanted to just pause for a second and see if, you know, now that you've had several weeks to digest any of that. I think I sent around to the members the slides that were presented in that last meeting. I'm happy to pull them up here again if you want. I'll at least drop a link in the chat if you want to refresh your memory. And what we're referring to specifically, although there were several presentations, was the updated current policies projections, which are the first round of modeling results that we have that are attempting to say, well, based on the current policies that we have at the federal and at the state level, what is the GHG emissions reduction trajectory of the state, right? And as we saw, that trajectory under current policies it comes short of meeting Maryland's statutory requirements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that is, of course, not entirely surprising, in part because the next round of modeling will include planned policies. So we have other policies that were not included in that round of modeling that will continue to, we think, bend the curve on the emissions. We'll see some of those results later this year. But of course, as usual, it's upon all of us to think of, in this moment that we're in, and given the challenges that we're facing, what are the new solutions that we need as a state to further reduce emissions and to get closer to Maryland's long-term objective of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions statewide by 2045. So Before we dive specifically today and thinking about the biggest sector of emissions, which is the transportation sector, we just wanted to create any space for any conversation that any of you have, reflecting on what you heard last time, any questions that you have about the modeling activity that was done or that we're continuing to do, just because it was a tremendous amount of data that was presented. So I wanted to give you that time to reflect and to bring any questions back to us. Yeah, Jamie.
Thanks again for the great presentation at the last meeting. Jamie DeMarco, representing Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I'm still haunted by that graph or the chart that showed, like, here are all the ways in which we've gone in the wrong direction, like red arrow on advanced clean cars. Federal action is complicating that. Wrong arrow, red arrow on, repeal of the investment tax credit. There are a number of ways in which the federal government is slowing things and making things go in the wrong direction. And then the one precious green arrow that was pointing in the right direction, we're actually getting more emission reductions than we anticipated the last time we ran the model. That is a result of state policy, was the Empower program, and switching Empower to being a greenhouse gas emission reduction program. Oh yeah, this is the one. So yeah, as you can see, like the green arrows we've got here, slower vehicle miles traveled growth than previously modeled. That's largely because of the pandemic and Zoom, sort of outside of state policy. But Empower changing to greenhouse gas emission goals was one of the only things that are going better than expected. That is the result of a choice made at the state level because of policy. And that, I think, is really significant and is something that should be recognized and defended. And when all these other things are moving in the wrong direction, we got to double down on Empower and making sure Empower stays based on greenhouse gas emission reduction goals.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
I'd second that.
Okay. Any other reflections, comments, questions about the treasure trove of data we presented last time?
If no one else has, I'll throw out a comment. I think one of the lessons learned, I think, that we ought to take from this is that we're never going to get all of the admissions from a plan that we originally projected. And there are times when we should look at the reasonableness of the plans and say, okay, is this something that maybe we can make more progress by asking for less? And this is just a personal opinion, but I mean, I look at what the plan had called for electric vehicles. I think the original numbers were never realistic for us. And the question would have been, would we have been able to achieve more if we'd had a plan that instead of mandating massive numbers, we could have ended up with some other scheme? Obviously, that's retrospective and 2020 hindsight. Similarly, we adopted a very aggressive building energy performance standards. Then the hospitals got exempted from the standards. Could we have foreseen that and taken it into consideration? So one of the things I think we should think about as we go forward and make plans is making sure that they are things that we can get the General Assembly and, more importantly, the public to get behind. Because if they're going to oppose it or the General Assembly is going to water it down, then we need to take that into account when we do the original counting. My own personal thoughts, anyway.
Thanks, Mike. Other comments, reactions? Yeah, Bob.
When I look at this, and I had a career in the U.S. Department of Energy, sometimes I don't necessarily look at it as a plan, but I look at it as a recommendation of what you have to do in order to achieve certain results. and that we don't have any, we don't have any resources to do that. We're sort of expressing what could be done to reach certain goals, but it's really up to the people who have the money, so to speak, to decide that they want to pursue that particular approach. If they don't, they don't choose to spend money on something, then obviously I think it's our job to say, well, is there another approach that we might recommend that would help? And that's very difficult at this point in time, given all the things that the federal government's doing and things that are happening, like in the state of California at this point in time, to come up with something. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Here, here. And that, as Bob just articulated, is the challenge that is principally on the mitigation working group to decide and recommend how do we get on track. Yeah, I mean, you might recall that a lot of the things that the mitigation working group and then the climate commission recommended wound up being in MDE's climate plan for the state. There's a lot of good brainstorming that happens right here, and now perhaps more than ever, we need your good thoughts on what specific actions could be taken to address some of those gaps that we're seeing in our achievement. And perhaps with that, maybe I'll pivot to a transportation focus, and I do want to have some time to really brainstorm with you all, given what we know right now of the challenges of deploying EVs and EV charging infrastructure, and in the face of some federal rollbacks, how do we address that? Unfortunately, we're not the only group thinking about that. Part of what I'll share is some of the high level recommendations from a group that actually just concluded its work in December, the ACC-ACT working group. So I can share with you some of that group's thinking about how to address some of these challenges. And then we'll turn to some discussion about the recommendations that they have, that we have, that this group has made in the past, and then perhaps what this group might want to recommend for this year. So pretty basic set of slides here that I've put together for you all today. Quick overview of this presentation. We'll look very briefly at just two sets of transportation sector emissions trends. We'll review briefly the ACC-ACT working group recommendations, the recommendations from the Climate Commission on transportation that have come out of really the MWG over the last few years, and then again leave some time for discussion. So as you saw on the slide deck from the University of Maryland Center for Global Sustainability, their presentation to you all last month, and I see Nate Holtman's on the call. Nate, you know this already, but your team does really tremendous work. Thank you for your partnership and support for all of this. But I want to bring forward to you all this key graphic, which is the current policies projection for transportation sector emissions. And in part to remind everyone of two things. This is our largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, and almost all of it, or maybe not almost all of it, but the disproportionate amount of it comes from gasoline and diesel fired cars and trucks, right? So it's on-road emissions, and it's all the vehicles that you see out there on the roads every day, right? So no big surprise where it's all coming from. But this is our core challenge, really, because when we look at statewide greenhouse gas emissions, this is the big chunk that we do need to really figure out how to address. And when we look at the key progress indicators within this, really the most critical in terms of an emissions reduction strategy is transitioning from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, right? So when we look at the registered EVs in Maryland, what you see here, the blue bars represent actual registrations up through 2025. What the orange line is the trajectory that we would need to be on to be consistent with an overall statewide trajectory of a 60% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2031. The green line is actually indexed to our old GGRA plan, which landed closer to a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions statewide by 2030. But you know, the story, and we've addressed this before, but just bringing it back into your mindset is, of course, our current adoption of EVs in the state is lagging behind really either of those lines. So a really key consideration for us as we think about how to address transportation sector emissions is specifically how do we help more people in this transition period toward adopting EVs. So by executive order, Governor Moore created the Advanced Clean Cars to Advanced Clean Trucks working group. And over the last year, that working group met and formed a number of recommendations. And the recommendations really aimed at generally the question that we have in front of us today. You know, how do we reduce transportation sector emissions, make progress toward our climate goals, and accelerate EV adoption, both vehicles and infrastructure? They published their final report and findings in December, just a few months ago. And this is a slide just to summarize. There's 6 key recommendations. I have one slide on each of these recommendations that provides a little bit more color around each one, so we can go through these relatively quickly. According to that group, number 1, complete the IIJA and IRA EV-related charging infrastructure projects. Number 2, incentivize and expand equitable community and multifamily dwelling charging investments. 3, expand road signage to increase awareness of charging infrastructure. 4, prioritize state incentives for EV charger programs. So right there, you see the top 4 are really heavily focused on charging infrastructure, right? Then you get into 5, conduct a market study for incentives. You know, this is where we bridge a little bit more into thinking about incentives for EV purchasing, but I think also the charging equipment was contemplated by that group. And then 6th, and this is actually a recommendation that came from you all just last year, study the implementation of a low carbon or clean fuel standard program. So we will, you know, just to add a little bit more color to each of those, you know, give you a little bit of the text that came from that ACT working group report. So on recommendation number 1, adopt benchmarks for completing the installation of the $330 million in IIJA and IRA federally funded charging infrastructure by 2028. Adopt clear interim and final benchmarks, transparent reporting, and corrective actions if timeline slip. The remaining resources are to be used to support charging at key locations and use all legal action to unlock frozen IIJA CFI funds. So, again, just trying to move quickly. I'm sure there might be some questions about some of the nitty gritty in here, but just trying to give you a high level overview of these recommendations for this group. Number 2, expand EV charging access in multi-unit housing, affordable housing, and in LMI communities. Combine incentives, update building codes, and provide implementation models with pre-qualified vendors and standardized designs. Provide technical assistance, streamline permitting, and optional on-bill cost recovery, and seek agency alignment on program design. Part of the reason I should have been clear about this from the forefront, one of the things that we hope to do in our discussion today is really think about, of the recommendations that these groups have made, are there ones that you think are most impactful for reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And therefore, in addition to what that working group said and identifying these 6 priority actions, are there ones that you would especially elevate and say, from a GHG mitigation perspective, we want to make sure that we're especially focused on, you know, maybe A or B or C? Number 3, install signage on state and local roads to direct road users to EV charger facilities and improve public confidence that EV charging stations are available. Increase support from CEF for EV charger grant programs to support planning, design, permitting, installation, and the installation of equipment. Conduct a market study for incentives to better understand incentives and considerations for light-duty EVs, including competitive incentives and incentive structures for a variety of vehicle classes, including medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles. And then finally, and I'll get to you, Jennifer, of these recommendations from the ACC-AC2 working group, also study the implementation of a low-carbon or clean fuel standard, study the feasibility, costs, and other impacts of this type of program as recommended by the Climate Commission last year. This is a program that's already implemented in a number of states. It would set an annual declining carbon intensity target for transportation fuel suppliers to have to achieve through a credit-based system. There's no significant fiscal costs, but it creates significant investments through private credit trading. So those were the main recommendations that came from that working group. And yeah, Jennifer, I see that you had a hand up there.
Yes, I have a question because I didn't see this as a recommendation. It seems that when you're driving, you want to know where there's an EV charging station near you and if it's functioning or not, and that it makes sense for that to be built into different GPS apps. And so I don't know what the status is of if you're on Siri or Waze or whatever mapping program, most cars, is that a way to do it? Because that seems like something that if it's not being done effectively, should be one of the foci.
Yeah, great question. And why don't we put a pin in that? Because I think that we will get into some discussion to unpack that and other strategies in just a few minutes here. Just a quick reminder of the recommendations that have come from the Climate Commission. And again, I think all of these originated at the MWG. So again, last year, you all recommended that MDE study a clean fuel standard with some analysis by the end of this year. We are working toward that goal right now. And then in 2023, I think it was, this group recommended offering stacked point of sale EV purchasing incentives with creating a base incentive of $2,500 for a new EV and $1,000 for a used EV that would be available to essentially everyone who would also qualify for the federal EV tax credits when they existed. But then you all recommended a bonus incentive to stack on top of that, $5,000 for a new, $3,000 for a used vehicle, specifically for low and moderate income households and individuals who are what we referred to then in 2023 as super users, those who drive a lot and produce disproportionately more emissions than others, to provide additional incentive to encourage them to switch. Your recommendations from 2023 also recommended the creation of a fleet electrification technical assistance program to help fleet managers around the state that operate sizable fleets transition their fleets to electric vehicles, and requiring new multifamily and commercial buildings to be constructed to meet at least EV ready standards, I think on the completion of a MEA study back in 2023. So just a quick reminder of some of the things that this group has previously said on this topic. And then with that, where we're hoping to go is a discussion, and this is pretty open-ended, right? The hope is to think about, of those recommendations that were made, are there ones that you would want to really amplify and bring forward as being most critical for GHG reduction? But also, very importantly, like the idea that Jennifer brought up, what other ideas have we not yet fully explored, or what ideas are really needed in this moment where the marketplace is, in flux and federal policies are very much in flux right now. I think that we are all consumers and can bring our own consumer lens and experience with driving in the state, if you do drive, to this conversation. And I really welcome that for, some creative brainstorming here to think about what else is needed. So with that, I heard, Jennifer, your point about, is there an app-based system, if you will, to help people figure out if chargers are available in that moment? My wife and I only drive EVs, so you would think that I'd have a good answer to this, but we do 99.9% of our charging at home overnight. So I'm probably the worst to answer that question in this group, because the few times I've needed to find chargers, the app that I happen to use does tell me if they're available. But perhaps I wonder if others are aware of the status on the multiple charging apps that are out there. Do they tend to tell people, if chargers are available?
Almost all the mapping apps will now show you charging stations. A Tesla app will tell you how many are available and operating. Not all of the other apps will tell you what's available or operating.
I have found that the apps, and there's a number of them for EV charging, do give what's available and what's
most of them, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I think that's in good shape.
Okay, thanks. I see. Yeah, good. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead while I look at the list of hands here.
Jennifer, you're muted.
Given the significant cost of subsidies for EVs compared to the cost of encouraging more people who are higher incomes and can afford to charge their own EV inside their own house, I actually think that realistically, given the state budget, that maybe our better bet is to advertise more strongly to people who can afford an EV, that they should do so, in terms of also using other things that can save greenhouse gases, that a marketing campaign to reduce greenhouse gases is going to give us a higher rate of return than subsidies for people to be able to afford these cars.
Got it. Advertising. I'm going to be keeping a list of all of the good ideas here that you all share. So I've got advertising on the list. I'm going to go with the hands in order that they came up. So Bob Wright, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I like Jennifer and Mike's suggestion. I'm wondering if some kind of study or process should be available to come up with the app to say, although it's there, is it working? I mean, I don't know what the reliability is, and to me, that would be an interesting study, because even if it's there and they're not working, it's people then start to lose faith in what the app says. And the second thing I'm thinking of, and I'm thinking of it in my particular neighborhood, is are there across the street from where I live, there are some townhouses, and some people have put in chargers, all right? But they might have to deal with homeowners associations. And the question is, are homeowner associations really being a barrier to letting people who are willing to pay for it themselves to put up a charging station? In this particular case, they ran a cable, 20 feet in front of the house so that it's right by their parking spot. But our homeowners association said that's fine. But I don't know about all homeowners associations. And if you're trying to increase the number of people that have EVs, are they, reluctant because their homeowner association won't let them put in a charger? They have a garage, it's not an issue, but many places, including apartments, don't have either a garage or an assigned parking space out in the lot so that they'd be willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. I gotcha. Okay. So adding to the list, and feel free as you all go through your comments, if you have any about your perspective on whether or not HOAs, homeowners associations are or are not a barrier, that'd be helpful to hear as well. But I'll keep on going down the list here. Nicola, hey.
Hey, I had one comment regarding the apps, and that yes, there are apps that show availability as well as functionality. It does show which apps are which chargers are down, need repairs. There's usually feedback users can provide if they have trouble using the charger, and things like that. I think what's missing is then action taken on those apps where users provide the feedback whether they're down or not, because oftentimes that information just sits in the app and doesn't seem to go anywhere, so that the operators, use that information to make the chargers functional again. So that I see that part as missing as a user of those apps. And then the second part regarding additional ideas, I think the first point you have there in terms of public education is really important. And today, affordability is on everybody's front of mind, and what it costs to get an EV and what it costs to make the building upgrades. And on the flip side, it could be good to do more public information outreach on what the cost is of not doing those things. Converting carbon emission reductions into what is the actual cost to customers to not do those things. Because right now we have, this is what it would cost me to buy an EV versus if I do buy one, we get carbon emission reduction, but those are not comparing apples to apples. So if you could, provide more information about what the cost is of not doing carbon emissions, what that means to customers, they have a better idea of how to make decisions for themselves and how these measures do reduce their cost of living as well.
Okay, thank you. Kim?
Thanks. A couple thoughts. One is I want to echo the sentiments by previous speakers that advertising, marketing the benefits of an EV that are not necessarily related to the environment, I think could be really powerful. I mean, it's, if you don't follow Mark Stewart on LinkedIn or social media, you should, because he frequently is posting about the $1,000 a year that he saves in EV costs or in vehicle costs. So I echo that. And I think it's a low investment on the state's part to really do a better job of advertising the benefits. I too agree with Nicola that the apps, if you use them, there's plenty of information and how are they operational? Are they working? Are they functional? Are they fail? I mean, it's all there. I don't think improving an app is going to cause those bar graphs to exponentially grow up, which leads me to my last point. I think all of these are important ideas, and I really do think they're important ideas. The rate of increase to get more EVs on Maryland roads is really high. And I think as expensive as it could be, I think incentives have to be part of the scenario. And maybe they're crafted different ways, but as much as we can support that, I would like to keep that on the table.
Thanks, Kim. Mike?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Jennifer on some of the issues, but I think a bit broader. My reaction to the recommendations are, to some extent, I don't mean to be too critical about this because I think it's understandable, address a world that doesn't exist anymore and won't exist for the remainder of Trump's term, right? I'll give you a couple examples. Additional signing on a highway. We just talked about the fact we're going to have apps and we've got a low, I don't really think having signs on the highway showing where charges are is going to move the needle. I think Kim is right about what moves the needle on the issues she's raised. I think also I'll give you another example, and I understand this is controversial, and I understand all the reasons to do it, but trying to put chargers in affordable housing neighborhoods, we've got to crawl before we can run. It's going to be a long time before affordable housing gets a lot of EVs. My own view is if you wanted to try to get low-hanging fruit, it's to incentivize the installation of home chargers in homes that have driveways and garages, and they got a second commuter vehicle, and therefore are not worried about chargers on the highway because they're only using that vehicle to commute to work, and they can save a lot of money by having an EV. And part of this, I think, is if we're trying to get to the original EV numbers, I just don't think you're going to do it without the massive federal incentives that are out there. And we risk losing low-hanging fruit if we try to design programs that only go after the bigger issues. So I would suggest that we need to look at some of these recommendations and say they would all be great, but are we missing something that have a smaller part? I'll give you a couple examples. The state in recent years has raised the registration fees for EVs. So now an EV is more expensive to register than an internal combustion engine. Is that a good idea, given that we're talking about trying to incentivize EVs and we've gone the opposite way? It may have happened for absolutely good reason because they lose the revenue of the gas tax for it, but is that the right way to go? We eliminated carpooling rights. I mean, the carpooling lane rights for EVs. I don't think many people used them anyway, but why did we eliminate that if that was something? So I do think there are smaller issues that may have a bigger impact because we're now at such low numbers. And I would suggest that we ought to look at those possibilities. Last point I'll make, because we've been talking about the EVs, but also on the recommendation were the clean fuels. I think it has a lot of merit, but the issue that I've raised about that, I'm concerned about, if that's going to raise the price of fuel in the state, you're politically going to run into a buzzsaw. Because any effort to raise the gas tax has created huge political controversy, even though that money goes directly to back in some sense to the cars on the road. I think if you assume that clean fuels are going to be easy to adopt if they have an increase in the cost at the pump, then it's not likely.
Thanks, Mike. Sorry, welcome.
Hi, yeah. I know I'm not a member of the work group, so let me know if I shouldn't weigh in. But I did just want to say Sierra Club was a member of this other work group, the ACC2 ACT work group, and we did play a role in formulating the recommendations. So I just wanted to share a bit of our thinking on those priorities, which I'll start by saying that the recommendation for really rapidly and effectively implementing federal funding is what we view as the most important first step that can be taken. Maryland is the recipient of millions of dollars in federal grants, including national electric vehicle infrastructure grants, charging and fueling infrastructure grants, and others. And we think that implementing those funds is super critical. I'll also just point out, it's not in the top 5, but there is a series of important recommendations under part 5. Utility and grid of the work group's final report. This is something that Sierra Club actually spoke to the Public Service Commission representative about, and we had extensive conversations about this language and really formulating the need to do this proactive grid planning. So this is not discussed as often, but is actually a really important prerequisite for vehicle electrification, is just really ensuring that Maryland's utilities are accurately forecasting where new loads will arise and reaching out to federal grant recipients and other large fleet operators, and then investing in reasonable and necessary grid upgrades that will actually enable power to be brought to those chargers. So just wanted to flag those 2 things, and thank you for the opportunity to kind of jump in.
Thanks for joining us today. I know you're a bit of an expert on this topic, so happy to have you. Jamie.
Yeah, enjoying this brainstorming conversation. I first want to say that I agree that tax or incentives for new EVs are important. I know there was a policy I had been working on, I think it was like 6 years ago now, that would have been a net neutral for cost incentive for EVs paid for by an increased vehicle excise tax on gas guzzlers. So it's sort of like, increase charge on polluting vehicles, use that money to make EVs more affordable. Overall, it's net neutral in terms of cost. So one idea to throw out there, I know money is tight, and so there's probably not general fund money for EV incentives. I also want to say for the record, I think congestion pricing is a great idea. I don't know. I just saw it on the screen here as a question. And as a working group member, I want to say I really like that idea. Manhattan has seen a 1 year, a 10% decrease in cars entering the congestion zone. They've seen a 17% decrease in noise complaints, 8% decrease in injuries from car accidents. It's sort of been a universal success. And there's not been an increase in traffic elsewhere. Traffic has actually gone down everywhere because buses are moving faster, more people are taking buses. Which gets to my other point, the last point I wanted to make, which is that I appreciate that we're going through the recommendations of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 working group. And that working group was asking a slightly different question than the question we are asking here today. That working group was saying, Advanced Clean Cars is being challenged federally. If it goes away permanently, what can we do to get EV adoption up? And the graph you showed at the beginning, Mark, posed the question of what can we do to reduce transportation costs or transportation emissions and costs? Obviously, getting higher EV rates and adoption rates is part of reducing transportation emissions, but it's not the only thing to do. The fastest, cheapest way to reduce emissions in the transportation sector is to get someone who is going to get in a car, get on a bus instead, or get on a train instead. And that can happen really quickly. The state, there's a very broad consensus body of knowledge and expertise showing that highway widening does not reduce congestion times. It just induces demand to increase pollution while just has more people sitting in traffic. Adding one more lane, it doesn't get rid of rush hour traffic, but adding public transportation infrastructure does. And the state spends millions and millions of dollars every year highway widening. And if we just took some of that money and put it into investing into public transportation options, that would provide Marylanders with better options for how to get to work. Less people would be sitting in traffic. Even the people who aren't taking public transportation benefit because there are fewer other cars on the road. This is exactly what Delegate Edelson and Senator Heddleman's Transportation Climate Alignment Act does. It said, let's not just invest in one mode of transportation. Let's invest in a diversity of transportation options to make sure every Marylander has as many options as possible to get where they need to go. So I think expanding public transportation investments can do a lot. There's been a big buzz also around making buses free. That can often pay for itself in reduced operating costs. There's little things where that we spend a lot as a state on court processing of very minor fines for people like didn't pay a bus fare. And if you just make the buses free, the buses run faster because they're not stopping. You're not arguing with like, hey, you got to pay. And you save on all those court filings in going after little $2 tickets people didn't pay, and more people ride the bus because it's free and fast. So I just want to raise those up as well.
I feel like I was listening to your podcast just then. Was it a good?
Maybe that's a sign I was talking for too long.
No, that's not how I meant it, Jamie. That's a good list of ideas there. Thank you for sharing that. Garrett.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I was actually going to say something very similar to Jamie. I mean, I think the ideas that we've heard so far about electric vehicles and the ways we can accelerate EV adoption and use are all right on. We need to try to expand infrastructure. We also need to not work at cross purposes. So we have seen Department of Agriculture came out with a new approach to inspecting and remedying problems that we have with EVs charging infrastructure that's out there now that serves the public, which would unfortunately add some new fees to that to the hosts of that infrastructure. And we're hearing a lot of concern that might actually cause some of the existing EV infrastructure that isn't used very much to be pulled back, and that's going exactly the opposite of what we need to do. So making sure that we're not as we do things to try to ensure the infrastructure is working and that the public has a good experience when they come to existing public facing chargers, we want to make sure we're doing that in ways that really that don't work at cross purposes, that really do advance the expansion of EV infrastructure and don't contract it. But all the things that we've heard about, the need for more signage, the need for more incentives, the need to make sure that the apps are becoming more effective at telling you when a charger is not currently operating. All of those things are very, very important. But I was going to say very much as Jamie did, I think while accelerating the transition to EVs is probably the primary thing we need to worry about on a statewide basis, we absolutely need to also be looking at in more of a place-based way. There are places, certain regions within the state where it's possible to get a lot of folks out of cars. And there are many societal benefits to doing that in those places. It could be very good for economic activity, for public health, et cetera. Less strain on the roads. There's a lot of different benefits that we get. And you know, the state, we as local governments count on funding from the state to help make some of these regional benefit, public serving transit kinds of projects to happen. A lot of those things cross jurisdictional boundaries. They're very difficult for local governments to fully fund on our own. And this would include bus rapid transit projects and rail and all that stuff. So continuing to see the state invest some funding where it is possible to help avoid vehicle use moving forward, I think is a really critical piece. Not necessarily applicable absolutely everywhere, but certainly a critical piece to this.
Thanks, Garrett. Ian?
So, I mean, I agree with a lot of what I've heard. So I kind of want to focus on what I didn't agree with. So Garrett, I'm not going to talk about the things you just talked about. Certainly, I was a little intrigued by Mike's statement about where the low-hanging fruit is. I think the conventional wisdom has been, and as it was displayed on, one of the slides that showed the recommendations from the ACC and ACT work group, is that we need more public charging infrastructure because that's how you combat range anxiety, right? That, whether or not people use it, they want to know it's available. And that's where sort of the signage comes in and the reliability questions come in. But it's got to be there, and people have to know it's there, and then they have to feel comfortable that if they needed to, even if they're charging at home 99% of the time, Mark, like you said you do, and many people on this call do, that if for some reason you can't, or you're going to be out for a longer time, especially because the more affordable EVs tend to be the ones that have less range, you got to be able to find a charger, even if you're not going to use it. You want to know it's available. So that's why I felt like testing that or doing a little pressure testing on that, I think would be kind of useful. I can say that, I think MEA has been investing in both, right? We have a program at MEA that does help to support those home chargers. We've also been trying to pivot more into public chargers and, in the multifamily developments where people cannot charge at home no matter what. Like, you're just cutting them out completely if they don't have charging infrastructure where they live or work, or in the community chargers. So I'm a little bit interested if we were going to have a discussion. I feel like that since there might be a little bit of difference of opinion on that might be something that would be worth spending a little time on. I think some of the other thoughts, we got to reduce VMTs, no question about it. Some of that goes into land use issues, TOD, which, gets thorny. There's a lot of housing discussions going on all over the country, let alone in Maryland and in the General Assembly this year. I don't know how much we want to weigh into that and how much impact we can have on some of those discussions. But certainly transportation is not just, single family vehicles, right? It definitely goes beyond that.
If I can just comment to follow up on Ian, I completely agree with you, Ian. I don't know that we know the answer, but the advantage of the home chargers is you don't care about range anxiety, because if somebody's using it as the second commuter vehicle to travel 30 miles to work and not, then whether it's got a 200-mile or a 300-mile range or whether they're public chargers on the way doesn't doesn't matter to them. So that's my thinking. But it could be that I'm totally wrong. But I don't know that, I don't feel like I've seen an answer that says $1 spent on a home charger versus $1 spent on a public charger, which one is more cost effective? Because we're living in a world where it's not, the money's not going to flow easily. And if you're going to try to get the most greenhouse gas reduction per ton spent, I think there's a legitimate question there. I mean, the other thing I would add real quickly, because I don't want to monopolize this, there are private companies putting in lots of public chargers. With their companies selling private chargers too, but which one, you know, the guys like Tesla are putting them in the places that they've tested it as the biggest demand for them. They're not, I'm not sure the home sellers are necessarily doing the same thing, but it's a question that I think we need an answer to.
Can I very quickly respond to that, and then I'll let Lewis speak? In terms of one of the metrics I know that we use at MEA is the thinking that, you know, if you've got a home charger, you might not use it even, you know, every day. You know, it might be 3 times a week or whatever, you know, versus a public charger, you know, let's say there's 2 ports, let's just say, so, you know, it could be used 6-7 times a day, depending on, you know, if the level 2 and where it is. And so that's one of the other factors that we think about. But you're absolutely right that we need to make sure that any public investment is going to the places where the private investment otherwise won't be, that we won't get that. And that's always what we try to do, you know, with public, you know, funding, is to try to fill in where the private sector is not working. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks. Yeah. 10 seconds, 2 times a week. That's how much time I spend with my at-home charger.
And you charge it at night during non-peak periods, right?
And you know, the app that the utilities are using for that, WeaveGrid, is getting pretty cool. I've realized recently, sorry to get somewhat sidetracked, but also on point for the MWG. Yeah, they've really like dialed in, I guess, when, of course, the electricity rates in terms of bulk purchase are cheapest, because it started to say, you know, like, we're going to charge your car from, you know, 11:45 to 1:15 a.m. and then we're gonna finish charging it between like 3 and 4 a.m. I'm like, that's fascinating. But anyhow, yeah, I get extra money from the utility for saving a whole lot of money by never, ever, ever having to go to a gas station ever again. So it's a feel good, folks. It's a feel good, and it's lightning fast. It's just fun. I mean, I'll stop myself. Okay, Lewis, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I guess sort of 2 observations. One is, I do think that cost comparison and I'll call it advertising or PR is an important component of this, because what are the 2 biggest issues that this General Assembly is debating right now? One is all about immigration, and I'm not talking about immigration as part of this meeting, but it's energy. It's electricity costs. This is like the #1 thing. How many bills have we seen in this General Assembly? People are afraid right now of their electricity costs. And so the adoption of an EV, whether or not you have a federal or state, you know, financial incentive that's been taken away, is going to be significantly hindered, because people are afraid of, how do I pay my electric bills right now? Right. And so unless you can demonstrate some of these cost comparisons, you're never going to have sort of the robust adoption while this type of fear is going on. And we don't really have an end in sight. The second observation, and this is a dirty word, I think, probably more so on this committee than elsewhere, is, look, on the car side, the big 3 have backed away from all electric. And so you need to shift some of your conversation to be more focused on hybrid vehicles, because that's what they're producing and what they're seeing the demand supports. And so in as much as, you know, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. 15 years ago, we could have had Toyota Priuses as the standard, and we wouldn't even be having these conversations about how bad GHG emissions are in the transportation sector, right? So I'm just saying, you know, back to sort of Mike's thing, what's realistic versus, this conversation about can we meet these all EV targets, which are probably unrealistic. So just my 2 cents.
I agree. There's a lot of education that we need to do around the energy costs. I mean, for the average American household, the number one household energy cost is gasoline. And we see that, there's not enough awareness about how much money can be saved on this EV transition. And how, with the off-peak charging, there's really, of course, ample electricity available to charge EVs, when the grid is not strained.
Yeah, only one comment on that, Mark. Sorry, and I don't want to monopolize, but I think the difference is, right, is when you go to pay at the pump, right, you're not seeing this one large bill. You're seeing it incrementally, right, as opposed to when I get my utility bill and I see that the amount is X $100 more expensive, on that monthly bill, that resonates more, I think, with people from a fear standpoint.
Yeah, I hear you. Garrett.
Yeah, I just think what Lewis points out is actually really fascinating. I think all of us who know anything about EVs all know that it's even with electricity prices being so much higher than they were, it still costs less than half to fuel your vehicle with if it's an EV than if it's a traditional gasoline vehicle. I mean, the idea, but it's not accurate. It's not correct for people to assume, oh, I should be scared of this, and yet it's the perception that matters. And there may indeed need to be some consumer education to try to help folks not be scared of shifting to electricity as the fuel source for your EV, because in reality, it's going to cut your bill in half-ish, something like that. There may need to be a lot of education on that. The one other thing that hasn't come up that I meant to mention earlier is that I think we are in this world of fiscal constraint in the state budget. We know there are a lot of ways in which if we could throw more money at the problem, there's a lot of really useful things we could do that could help accelerate EV adoption. If we don't have very much money, we need to really push ourselves to think about what can we do that doesn't cost anything that could help in the near term and ideally in the long term. And I think one of those things is to say, when we're building new buildings, especially new larger buildings that could incorporate shared parking areas, we've got to be putting in the infrastructure at that time of new construction to enable these buildings to be EV ready. We don't know who's going to move into them when we're first building the building. Maybe we're not ready to put in EV charging from the get-go, but it's pretty silly for us to keep building new buildings, especially of any significant size, that aren't capable of quickly that don't have the conduit, that aren't EV ready. It's a pretty negligible additional cost to make buildings EV ready at the time of new construction, and it's considerably more expensive to go back and retrofit that work later. I think Sari brought up in the chat earlier that there's also potential to think about potential power demand on site when you're at the time of new constructions. There's a cost efficiencies. If we believe, as we do, that we need to move into this EV transition, then we need to be building buildings the right way from the beginning. And that's something that we can do that both doesn't cost the state anything and also has a pretty negligible cost on when we're talking about the context of new construction.
Thanks, Garrett. Nate.
Great. So thanks. This has been a great discussion, and thanks everybody for the contributions. I wanted to lift up 2 points that I've heard other comments on, so I wanted to kind of add a little bit of a +1 on some of them. And by the way, others may have mentioned it, so I might be more than just one person each. But one theme that was inherent in Garrett's recent comment, and I think Ian may have brought up earlier, is the there's a big gap we have right now in charging with the multi-unit residences, and there's some people with homeowners associations or condos or this kind of thing where they're not the sole owner of the property and have restrictions and constraints on home charging as a result of that. I just want to kind of make sure that we lift that up. I think that there are some it's a thorny issue in many cases because of reasons that probably other people on the call know better than I do, but I think that that's a critical area that the state might be able to sort of make some progress on, and with policies that don't necessarily require large amounts of budget, just to kind of ensure that those residences could be served. As Mark was making eloquently the case that the home charging is so important, we are just missing such a big block of our of access in our state because people that live in multi-unit residences can't do that. So to the extent that we can apply some energy and effort in this group and with others to think through what the options are and see if we can find some ways, I think that would be super helpful. I want to pick up also on Garrett's point. I was going to mention that as well in my comment is the EV ready buildings. We've even done a study and some additional studies on EV ready policies, and it does sort of indicate that there's a real effect from just a few $100s worth of additional cost. You can actually see an effect in increased adoption in specific locations, and so ultimately, those kinds of policies can help, even if they're on the margins. It does actually matter, and they're not, again, heavy budget lifts. So things like that, creative thinking, I think could be a really helpful place for us to be looking for trying to sort of unlock some of those. I believe, others have mentioned, but there is arguably some pent-up demand, including because of the cost issue that others have raised, I think, effectively on the call already. The fact that it is cheaper, the recent studies showing it's cheaper to buy used EVs. We've talked about this in terms of total cost of ownership. So I think those arguments, as many people have said, could be quite high traction right now. But just to make sure that the charging could be done in those locations. The other small point I want to make, just to kind of as it has come up both in the chat and some of the comments, is the fact that we are in a kind of more complicated and even say tougher situation for EV manufacturing right now in this country, and also from some of the other suppliers around the world. Tariffs are not helping with that right now, and that's kind of a good sort of thing for us to be aware of. The other thing, though, that I think is an important point that some of the work we've done, as Mark mentioned at the outset, is kind of thinking about this longer term to 2031, 2035, and even toward our net zero. And I think it's very important to also remember, like, the actual EV costs without these sort of weird temporary distortions are dropping quite dramatically. And I think we should remember that even though we're in this moment now and it's tough and frustrating and difficult, and let's work on the difficulties of today, but to also remember that within a few years, potentially, few meaning 3 to 7, something in that order, the battery costs will continue to drop, the EV integrated costs will continue to drop, and they'll only get cheaper relative to internal combustion cars. And so being ready in Maryland for that situation to happen is another sort of part of our thinking that we could build in. Thank you.
Thanks, Nate. Kim.
Yeah, just a short point, although it feels like it was about 3 days ago when this came up, but I guess I'm responding to Lewis's and Mike's point, and they're not wrong about the realistic nature of the goals. I mean, I understand that, and I'm going to be a broken record on this, but that is not this work group's purview. And until the General Assembly changes the goals, that we have to stay focused on meeting them and come up with the ideas and the suggestions and the recommendations in order to get there. So I just want to keep us oriented that way. Y'all can put in bills to change the goals, and then our work group format and agenda can change. But until then, we got to stay focused on those.
Thanks, Kim.
That's a very fair statement, Kim. I do want to acknowledge that. So absolutely. Yeah.
Mike, I think your hand is up next.
A comment on a couple of them. Just one, there was legislation passed, I believe it was last year, that made the HOA issue a little bit less, and then there's legislation pending this year that would make it even easier. So that is an issue which the General Assembly is looking at. I mean, doesn't mean we couldn't do recommendations on it, but it is an active issue. The other thing, Garrett, on your point about the little extra cost, it depends on what you're asking for. I did a lot of work on this in a prior legislative session. If you're asking for a few level 2 chargers, it is a small cost. Some of the proposals ask for a lot of chargers in terms of percentage, and it became a huge impact for multifamily housing, which is another priority of the state. So it's, again, you have to define what it is you're asking for, because at some point you have to start upgrading the entire electrical system to supply the additional demand, which falls, even though it may not be peak for the grid, it's peak for that particular multifamily home, because everybody's plugging in their car at the same time and charging them at the same time. So there are some proposals that would have been enormously expensive, particularly for multifamily housing. There are some other proposals that weren't. So the devil's in the details.
Thanks, Mike. Ava.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I really appreciate the conversation. And I apologize if I'm switching topics, but let me know if that's not appropriate. But I think there was a comment made in the chat about telework, and just in general, I think that relates more broadly to behavior change modification that has to happen to get that mode shift really taking place. I know the state has several commuter incentives like cash for commutes or commuter cash and guaranteed ride home. I'm Mark, I don't know if this group is tracking like the adoption or the utilization of some of those programs. I know there's like local government requirements to help promote some of that, like iRide and things as well. But I do think that's a huge opportunity that the pandemic proved actually does show quite a significant return on investment that doesn't require the same degree of kind of like some of these big policy and legislative shifts. Obviously, we need the bigger shifts. We need the infrastructure. We need the charging. We need to get to that EV adoption. Absolutely, but I think some of the expansion of telework incentives, and especially at the federal with the federal government, that had seemingly gone away for a lot of people that were leveraging that. So the more I think state and local governments and other employers can be intentional about providing those types of flexibilities, I think could be really, really helpful. And then I'm not sure if there's more that like local government should be doing on the behavior change front when it comes to transportation approaches, because as so many people eloquently described, those behaviors intersect very intimately with design and access and transportation systems. But yeah, I think that's a portion of the transportation conversation, or how we decarbonize transportation systems, that I think often gets overlooked, or even I think Jim Wagner even mentioned like carpooling. So just wanted to highlight that as an area that we could potentially be delving deeper into.
Thank you. And I imagine my colleague Morgan over at MDOT and I are probably taking some notes right now on some data that we could bring back to this group on some of the existing programs like commuter choice.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks. So I've got a whole page of good ideas here. One of my thoughts, and perhaps not surprisingly, we didn't exactly all jump on one idea and say, that's the winner. Let's flesh that out. Don't know if that's ever happened here, but what we do have is a solid list of really important topics. So one suggestion I have is that I could assemble, reflect this back out to you all, maybe in a like an online survey format, and help identify, like, you all could kind of maybe pick the ones that on this list of ideas that you think are most important, maybe even identify items associated with them where you'd like to learn more. I mean, part of what we're trying to do here early in this year is identify the agenda for future meetings, right? If we know that we want to have some recommendation on transportation sector decarbonization this year, what more information would you want to discuss or have presented to you this year in order to help you formulate the high impact recommendation that we're hoping for? So the steering committee will definitely think a bit about how to take some of this information that we're hearing today and make something targeted and useful out of it. But I just wanted to say, as we're in the middle or wherever we are in today's conversation, that thank you for all these ideas. We're taking note of them, and we'll figure out how to focus on priority actions within this list. Are there additional ideas or comments on any of these topics, or any that we haven't heard about yet that anyone wants to put out there? Yeah, Bob.
Sometimes I don't conceptualize correctly what people are talking about. So if we're talking about a parking garage and, people are saying, well, it should be EV charger ready versus the chargers. My enlightenment was that you have a certain number of parking spots, and then they usually have an app so that when people pull in and want to charge their car, they don't necessarily have to have chargers at every single parking spot in the garage. They might have it for 10, all right? And those are shared among people. Is it beneficial to sort of have a short tutorial on, if we put them in, here's what we would do? I know in terms of people building, developers building garages, they revolted against, well, I can't put in 100 chargers because I don't know whether we're going to, have 100 cars, but I'm willing to put in 10. And then you explain to them how they might be able to utilize 10 to cover, 100 cars. So it's sort of what I would call a tutorial or educational way of saying it's not as going to be as expensive as you think it's going to be, because here's the way you would do it. Not that you would put a charger at everybody's parking spot. Just a thought.
I see. So the idea being there really that it's, the building owner, the property manager that might need a tutorial or some better understanding of the incentives that are available, but also the level of infrastructure requirements and the associated costs with those. That's a good idea. Oh, hey, Russ. Yeah, I remember.
Hi there.
Yeah, good. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, so about the mud charging, like following on what Robert was saying, there are also low power level 1, level 2 outlets that companies have where they can essentially install the outlets at every parking spot. And then they enable them through like power sharing at the panel to charge a certain person's account or whatever. But then you don't have to have a charging station and full power going to every single parking spot. And then people can maintain their assigned spots or things like that. So those have been successful. We have programs in California that are using them. There's at least like 3 or 4 companies that have that kind of solution. That's a cheaper, sort of more of elegant, and because mud charging, I mean, you have really long dwell times. So you're not really concerned even if it's a level 1 charger at 1.5 kilowatt. The cars are there for so long that they don't have an issue usually.
Interesting.
I just want to re-up that and say that I have been charging my EV with a plug just into a regular outlet for years, and it works great and it works fine. It plug in overnight and get all the charge you need.
Is there much in the way of integration with batteries in that case? I mean, batteries have been on my mind a lot as I've been thinking about, how to best utilize like time of use rates and charge up the batteries when electricity is cheap, and then use that stored power when we're in those peak hours. So just, I guess, on like the multifamily housing charging solutions, is there also, in terms of the stacked value proposition there, any technology that's coming out where it's like, oh, you get your battery for your that daily charge up, you have cheap electrons and then discharge during the more expensive times along with the charging infrastructure?
I think I can respond to that a little bit for you, Mark, because that's what I do. I have solar panels on my roof and batteries in the basement, and then charge my car off the batteries at night, which are in fact charged off the solar panels. But the capital investment is hard to justify. I mean, it means I never buy fuel for my car, but the capital investment to get the batteries in the basement initially makes it a little bit harder to justify.
Mike, I don't want to be rude and crass, but could you share what that investment was? If you feel uncomfortable?
Well, I'm not sure I remember the number. I remember when I did it, this is years ago, but when I did it years ago, the batteries were expensive, but I justified it to myself that where I'm protected against brownouts and blackouts, which where I was on the Eastern Shore, blackouts were not uncommon. The transformer had been blown out like 3 times that year by squirrels crawling in it. So
there were other benefits to be calculated. We just did the same thing at the trust, and everyone else.
Exactly. And I think that's, look, the solar panels you can justify on that. And so the additional battery costs, and the batteries are cheaper now than they were when I bought them, I'm sure. Ian probably can give us the latest numbers on that. But no, I mean, I think it is a legitimate solution you can get. If you're scaling it up to a multifamily, it may be, the capital cost may become more significant.
Well, I know these are really common, but at the Chesapeake Bay Trust, we just did solar, batteries, and EV chargers. If anybody wants to come down and check it out, let us know.
They work. The 3 work really well together. You can get the capital cost initially.
Yeah, and I think batteries only really make sense when you have solar. I mean, if you want it for the backup, like some people have had home generators for when the power goes out, then that's a different sort of calculus. But if you want it to, because you think you're going to reduce your overall costs by doing time of use charging, I don't think the math is ever going to pencil. You've got to have solar there to bank all that solar energy that you can generate during the day and to utilize at night, whether you're charging your vehicle or running your house on it. Otherwise, I just don't think it's ever going to pencil. You also got to factor in like the losses. Every time you charge a battery, there's losses. And when you discharge, when you're converting from AC to DC, so I just think, that's unlikely to ever pencil out. Yep.
Thanks. Great information that's shared here at the MWG. Love these meetings every month. Quick preview, in 1 month from today, March 25th, that's our next MWG meeting. And it's always a fun one. It's when Kim and Mike give everyone an update on bills that are on the move. So do look forward to that. Maybe I'll make a call. We certainly don't need to use the entirety of the 2-hour block of time that's on your calendars. But maybe one last call. Any other transportation related ideas that anyone wanted to get out there today? As soon as I said that we didn't need to use the full time, that was the death nail, wasn't it? Okay. All right. Well, then reading the room, Kim, Mike, any concluding comments?
No, I appreciate all the comments and the careful thought that's given into this. Remember that your thinking on this, I don't think, is limited to the time that we're actually meeting. If you have ideas and want to provide them, Mark would be the person to coordinate all that. But we go back to the steering committee and share what the feedback is. In turn, there's a feedback goes to the commission from us. So feel free to provide any thoughts at any time. And that includes members of the public as well.
Again, I'll just say it's echoing that too, that, most meetings were just giving you information and presenting data and presenting updates. So I enjoyed the conversation, frankly, and the ideas. So let's use this model in the future again.
All righty. Well, more discussion to come then. Thanks, everyone. We will see you again in 1 month from now. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.